All right, Molo, Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of, Liberty and Friends, here on the Big Daddy Liberty channel. Welcome to it. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy. I'm using 4G. Well, I'm meant to be using 4G. Nonetheless, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Remember, the only long format show here on the Big Daddy Liberty show. So get something warm to drink, or using the Afrikaans warm there, get something hot to drink, because you will probably be here for a good 2 hours or so. But because there's been a lot in this week's news week. Now, before we get into any of that, a reminder to you, if you're watching this simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter, do me a favor, hit that like button. Yebo, smash that like button. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube in particular, subscribe to the channel. Help me grow my numbers and help me reach my goal number, if you will. By the end of the year of 50,000 subscribers, I think we're a decent way there, like 43,000, I think. With that being said, a reminder also that we have a website. Find us, please, at bigdaddyliberty.com. There you'll get some very interesting information going forward as to what is happening to the show, the new direction that we're taking, the launching of a separate foundation that will be doing some interesting work. Let me not say too much around that. Make sure you please visit the website at bigdaddyliberty.com. Now, that being said, enough of that jibber jabber. How about I introduce the friends part of tonight's show? Remember that it is a revolving panel of panelists, guys who help me give solid, compelling analysis you will get nowhere else except here. Now, with that being said, first up on screen, there he is. He is, of course, the head honcho over at Flack PR. I'm getting that name wrong
Flack
somehow.
Partners, yeah.
And he has a YouTube channel, Tim Flack. Bro, good evening.
Hey, bud, how are you?
Good to see you, man. Just a reminder to the folks, your YouTube channel, please.
It's YouTube channel is Guns Uncensored, so you can see it at Guns Uncensored on YouTube, yeah. Some pretty cool stuff.
That is, of course, Tim Flack coming to us all the way from the Cape. Shout out to him, man. Good to have him on the show. This fella is no stranger to this channel. It's been a while. We've seen him, at least, because he's super busy over at the Institute of Race Relations. I'm talking, of course, about Marius Roodt. There he is on screen. Marius, good evening.
How's it, Tim?
How's it?
Good to see you, Marius. Remember, you can also find Marius's writing, all his content over at the Daily Friend. That's www.dailyfriend.co.za. Shout out to them, man. They come to you Mondays to Thursdays at 1:30 p.m., Marius, or is it 1 p.m.? There it is. Yeah. All right. Here's a fellow. I know he's a firm favorite on the channel. Former colonel within the U.S. Armed Forces, a chap who is the head honcho at his own show, the Chris White Africa Show. Chris, good evening.
Chile, Sawabona. How you doing there, brother?
Good to see you, man. How's the summer holding up there in America? You guys should be having fun.
Well, I know that I got a lot of grass to cut. We got some rain recently. It is summertime, and I've kind of been putting that off. I need to get together because I'll be headed back to South Africa in a couple of weeks. But yeah, it's pretty well. Northern Hemisphere summertime. You guys, of course, in wintertime. But that doesn't explain the Springboks performance Saturday, and I'll leave it at that.
Oh, man, you had to bring it up. That's Chris White, of course, out in the US of A. Let's see. Yes, he is on. He is, of course, the head honcho over at Action Society, not to be confused with Action SA. Action Society actually gets stuff done. He is, of course, Ian Cameron. Ian, good evening.
How's it, everyone? It's good to be with you, Sihle. It's fantastic to join you again. It's been a long time.
Absolutely, and good to have you on the show. last but not least will be Utanda Mabaso. He's having a few connection issues due to load shedding, that bane of our society. Wow, just the moment I said bane of society, I just imagined bane at ESCOM. It doesn't matter what your plans are. Anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. I'm back. Fellas, as always on the show, we wrap up the news week that was, providing the sort of analysis that people don't see on the mainstream media. So let's get into that because there's quite a jam-packed show tonight. South Africa has been a very, very busy news week. I'm going to begin here as I just struggle to get it on screen. And as I'm doing that, a reminder, as I'm struggling to get anything on screen, your duty, dear viewer, is to hit that like button and to get your comments in. Because remember, Liberty and Friends is interactive. Your comments will be flighted on screen throughout the show. And of course, you'll be invited to be a part of tonight's show. This is Liberty and Friends. There we go. There's the man of the moment so far as our first story tonight. One deputy president of the South African Republic, a chap who's been in the news for all the wrong reasons as of the last 3 weeks, perhaps. Initially, of course, surrounding the issue of his bodyguards acting like absolute thugs, beating up citizens on the side of the N1 highway. Then a week later, the revelation comes that here's a chap who's living in the lap of luxury, a 37 million rand mansion that he prefers to live in instead of his state house. Now, that in and of itself, fellas, I don't have a problem with. It's his private home, whatever the case may be. But that's the real issue here. Is it a private home? Or, like most political elites, as being alleged, is this luxury mansion funded by you, dear taxpayer, where the allegations, according to News 24, and I'll quickly revisit them in this piece here, is that the actual home itself is a 37 million rand house in an exclusive waterfall estate in Midrand. The house is registered on a 99-year lease to Legacy Properties. According to the company records, the directors of Legacy are Mashatile's son, Tabiso, and his son-in-law, Unceba Nonkwelo. Nonkwelo Investments received, and this is the kicker, Nonkwelo Investment received at least 4 loans from the Gauteng Partnership Fund, totaling at least 30 million rand between 2013 and 2017, overlapping with Mashatile's second stint as Human Settlements MEC in the province. End of quote. That's where it gets very interesting. Is this another case again of you, dear taxpayer, via these state agencies funding the largesse of the political elite? Now, I'm going to come to you, Marius, on this one because actually, before I do that, I see Utanda is on. Let me actually get him on the show. Tanda, Baba, good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Good to have you on, Mfetu. Just whilst we have you on, just if you can sort out in mic here, you're a bit faint. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. As you saw that first topic, Tanda, we're getting into, and I threw it to Marius. Marius, are we seeing a situation here of deja vu for many South Africans who really are quite sick of this kind of arrangement where seemingly political elites get the best of the best at our expense?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And it doesn't seem that Paul Mashatile is going to be, it's going to be politics as usual, I think, with Paul Mashatile. I mean, there's a lot of people seem to think he might become president of South Africa sooner rather than later. I'm not too sure. I think he's, I think Ramaphosa is probably still going to be around for a while yet, I think. But I think it shows what's happened with Mashatile, all these controversies around him, the 37 million rand house, the way his bodyguards attacked those people on the side of the highway. I mean, that was grotesque, that actually. But it shows you he's exactly the same as every other single ANC politician. It's he doesn't see South Africans as citizens, he sees them as subjects, I think. And, there's no ways. And also, just with the stuff with the house and so on that we're talking about now, just shows there's no even an attempt to be on the right side of the law. It's a lot of this is they hold South Africans in such contempt, a lot of our politicians, and I don't think Paul Mashatile is different. And I mean, from what I've seen, nothing that I've seen makes me think he's going to be different from anybody who's been any of the hypes in the ANC who's been in charge of this country for the last 29 years.
again, it becomes very scary for me when I situate this story within the context of South Africa right now, where 1 in 5 South Africans effectively are food insecure, going hungry. The poverty rate in this country has screamed up since effectively 2019. Again, since before that, but really accelerated from 2019, 2020 onwards, thanks to the asinine policies of the spicy cough and the lockdown. And you have a situation where the ordinary South African, even folks who are reasonably middle class, who thought of themselves being okay, are now finding themselves become the sort of dependents on the state that they never thought they'd ever be before. People are becoming poorer. And then you have a situation here, Tim, where we read seemingly weekly, if not daily, that the political elites in this country, dude, it's really creme de la creme stuff. They're enjoying a very high standard of living off of effectively a tax base that is shrinking.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, they seem to be they're enjoying the chow, and the chow's been going for a couple of decades, and they're enjoying themselves. And at the end of the day, what sort of boggles me is, doesn't someone like the deputy president earn a decent enough salary that he can afford his own house? He doesn't need to use those sort of things to live in a lap of luxury. And at the end of the day, there needs to be rules that are made that say, listen, dude, we've got a state property for you that's got all the security measures in place, and they do have it. I spent time in the National Ceremonial Guard. I guarded some of these guys. They have state houses in Pretoria. They have housing in the Western Cape too. They don't need a 37 million rand property to go and sit there. And I mean, if you're well behaved as deputy president, you're going to sit there for at least 5 to 10 years. I mean, it's why I don't know. It baffles me, and it gets me kind of angry and out of breath sometimes. My blood pressure's rising a little bit now.
I don't blame you, because Thanda, let me throw it to you, and I'll come to the other fellas in a moment. Here's the kicker for me, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but this point has to be made, and made overtly, because you're not going to hear it in the political elite spaces and really in the mainstream media. Thanda, Paul Mashatile, for all intents and purposes, has been a state employee, a public servant in inverted commas, since the advent of democracy. How is it possible that these people are building 37 million rand houses? And I'm going to come to Chris in a moment with that question, because Americans are also having the same conversation around certain high-profile politicians. These public servants who, the moment they take up office, become multimillionaires. Time.
Can you guys hear me properly?
Perfectly well.
Okay, awesome. Now, happy to be on the show. Look, it's obviously a question that's on all our minds. How it gets done, and obviously they try to hide these things behind, family members and companies. And now I'm staying at my brother's house. So and so has started a business. He's a great businessman. We saw it with Ramaphosa's son as well, with Bosasa, so a few years ago, where it came out that he had secured a contract with them. But they obviously have become, I think, the thing they study the most politicians, what they study the most is how to benefit themselves. The ANC has been in politics for a long time. They've been in government for a long time, but generally politicians don't know how long they're going to be around for. So it seems that most South African politicians, whenever they get a window of opportunity, it's a window of opportunity not to serve or to show how good they can be, but to take as much as they can, because they don't know at the next election cycle if they'll still be there or if they'll be gone. So I think that's really the sad thing, in my view, when I look at South African politics, is that what Mashatile is doing, I don't think anything's going to happen really about it, because we've seen that most of them are into that. We've seen there was a really Kize thing a little while ago, and it was supposed to be a huge thing. A lady got killed over it. Just last week, we saw him at an ANC meeting, business as usual, just in the backbench enjoying his money there. So I think, from the ANC perspective, we can talk about it, we can make a big deal about it, but it's something organizational. It's just the way it is. It's not really, he's not really an unusual, he's not sticking out as a politician. Yeah.
The last point. of him not sticking out, again, exposing that poverty of politics, if you will, that we experience from our political elites in this country. And by the way, when I say the political elites, dear viewer, please don't think I'm picking and choosing. Please don't think somehow your favorite politician is exempted from Big Daddy scorn on this issue. You guys know this. I say it all the time. Hashtag politicians are trash. There's a reason why I'm saying this. I'm trying to jolt South Africans out of this weird obsession of a messiah complex that comes from the political state. This idea that the state or government is your friend. It simply isn't. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Chris. I want to have you have last word on this one because, you know, Ian, this sort of behavior, this sort of impunity, if you will, this sort of idea that the political elites deserve the creme de la creme at our expense far goes beyond just the issue of money. You see this even in how the politicians act in their own portfolios, where it's the best for them and crumbs for us. You, for instance, enter into very wild battles with a certain asshat police minister, Ubheki Cele, where he's the typified example of what I'm talking about, of the best for himself, a phalanx of bodyguards, and people literally in the streets of Cape Town or Durban shot in the head in point blank daylight.
Yeah, Sihle, no, I think Cele is one of several examples. I think he is, he likes being in the spotlight so much that we obviously see more of what he does. But I can tell you now that the vast majority of cabinet members behave in exactly the same way. I've got no doubt that there are far more of the blue light thugs that are actually, well, I can would most likely tell you that they are involved in organized crime of some sort. The way they approach things, the way they handle themselves, the way they treat the public creates the impression that the public is there to serve them and not the other way around. And I think it's crucial that, and I actually want to challenge more people to say that, yes, I agree that a lot of politicians are trash. I agree with what you say. But we need to change that because politics is a part of life. That's how it is. It's like in a business to think that there won't be conflict or internal politics of some sort. And the only way to take these guys head on is through, I believe, is strong civil society. Obviously, there's the political route as well, but I really believe that strong civil society plays a role. I can just tell you, my experience the last 2 weeks with this blue light matter, we are representing some of those victims. And the intimidation from the state is absolutely shocking, where they tell the one victim, you would have remembered the one guy lost consciousness in the video. And, where the SANDF just says, sorry, you're not allowed to see your own medical report. It must be taken by military police. Military police will hand it over to IPID. I just said to our investigator, there is no way. You make sure you intercept that before military police or IPID get there, which we did. And I must say, since then, IPID is cooperating very, very nicely. But in terms of the SANDF, the fact that there's no doubt that there is very, very serious political interference in all of these bodies. And I mean, there's something this simple. This isn't a difficult matter to handle. If Paul Mashatile had any integrity, which we all know he doesn't, he should have come out first, immediately saying that was my convoy. They should have come out with reasons for them acting the way they did. And we all know they can't justify what they did. But my point is just that there are ways of mitigating such a situation. And these guys are so far in with their criminal underworld approach in South Africa that they just simply don't solve these issues.
A complete collapse of the rule of law, a complete collapse of accountability, a hanging question over the nature of our political elites in this country, especially on the issue, Chris, of how these people become multimillionaires off of effectively public servant salaries, an almost nebulous web of the political elites here who, again, do this at the expense of ordinary citizens. That is something we're seeing not only in South Africa, but worldwide, really.
Yeah, you absolutely do see it worldwide. You see it in the States. First, I've got to make it very clear. It's been a while since I've been on Sea Light, so I think I should let people know that I'm not the garden boy. Just so you know that up straight up front there. Let's go with that, okay? All right, but seriously, I bring kind of a unique perspective to this as an intelligence and security professional, an independent journalist, and also an elected official. I'm a judge of elections, so that's from all sides of the angle here. The thing for me is that, listen, public officials are genuinely in danger from people who mean them ill harm, and they do need protection. But there's a difference between building a fire pool in a house in Nkandla and actually having legitimate protection. And the same with this blue light madness that's been going on around Africa. I've seen it all over Africa, but in South Africa some time, people being killed by out of control people driving, hitting pedestrians and causing accidents and things like that. But this, from my perspective, is a consequence of ambition, greed, elite patronage systems, and the trappings of office. And let me explain what I mean by that. In South Africa, we see a lot of folks go into politics to become rich, to get their hands on the tenders. And you see this especially in KZN, which is your neighborhood there. We've seen over 100 counselors assassinated in the past 10, 15 years in KZN. I'm talking about ANC counselors, but now we've seen ACDP counselor assassinated, IFP counselor who was killed. This is a pretty frightening thing. Instead of children growing up to aspire to be astronauts and farmers and doctors and clinicians and nurses and teachers and soldiers and policemen, we have members of the African National Congress who are inculcated with the values of patronage so that they can become counselors so they can get their fingers on the tenders. So it's not exclusive, but a lot of people go into politics in South Africa simply to get their fingers on the pot. In the USA, that does happen from time to time at the local level, but we have more robust justice systems, although I have to chuckle a little bit about the way our justice system has been perverted in the past 5 years, but we have more robust systems to catch that. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But at the local level, we do have that happen where people come in, get their fingers on the tenders and be corrupt. But most of what I see, particularly at the state and federal level, comes from politicians who believe their own press and think they're somebody special. They're the anointed ones. And they get far too comfortable lording over the peasants with the trappings of office. And a case in point, this is Nancy Pelosi, who got inside information, her and her husband, and they purchased shares of Visa and became millionaires 10 times over, multimillionaires, by selling stock and buying stock that they had inside information to. And no action's been taken against her. And she's far from alone. We got Democrats, Republicans who do this. These people get too comfortable. They like it's not blue light escorts in the States. That's only for heads of state and governors and things like that. But what we do have is your appearances on MSNBC, on Fox News. Everybody wants to talk to you. You're important. You're in the paper. People come to you. They want to do this. They put a security system in for your house, or they pay for a junket to go to Epstein Island. I mean, an island in the Caribbean, things like that, and this is what happens. And this is why people who implicitly trust governments, particularly the Karens running around, put your mask on. Oh, you're not wearing a mask. People like that really need to be given a little bit of medication, because implicitly trusting a government is foolish. Government's comprised of human beings. Human beings are flawed. Human beings are corrupt. Not all, but this is what happens. And we shouldn't trust these people. It's the same on both sides. And the only way to do this is have robust checks and balances in a criminal justice system and prosecute criminals. But as Thanda said a few minutes ago, what's going on with Waylon Kesey? The Special Investigating Unit found prima facie evidence of his guilt. They have the guilty information. Now, he does deserve a trial, but not only has he not had a trial, he hasn't even been charged with a crime, despite the fact that they said he committed a crime. All he got was removed as Minister of Health. He still sits in Parliament drawing a 2 million rand salary per year. That's nonsense, and that's why the system is broken. That side on the side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the parallels really are very striking for me when you watch the behavior here and the behavior across the pond. Fellas, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. You're watching, of course, the one long format show here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Remember, all you need to do if you're joining us on whatever platform, YouTube, Facebook, or on Twitter, is hit that like button. Yeah, bo, do me a solid favor. Hit that like button. And of course, if it is on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. We are joined tonight by Tim Flack, who of course is the host of Guns Uncensored. There it is, the host of Guns Uncensored. Please make sure you find him on YouTube. Marius Roodt from The Daily Friend, a contributor, writer, and analyst over there. Find them, please, at dailyfriend.co.za. Chris Wyatt, host of the Chris Wyatt Africa Show. Shout out to him, man, joining us from all over from the all the way from, rather, not all over the US. He's not Carmen San Diego. Excuse that reference. I think the panelists will understand it, but not you as the audience. Nonetheless, Ian, of course, Cameron from Action Society. Good to have him on. And Utanda Mabaso Nsizwa from Pretoria joining us tonight, of course, analyst out in that part of the world. This is Libertarian Friends. Fellas, I'm going to move us on because, again, it's been a very busy news week. Very, very busy news week. Here's a nice little image I'm going to put on screen, which I think annoyed the F out of every single South African because we've seen this before. It always happens, and there's always an excuse for why it's happening and why law enforcement didn't pick it up. What am I talking about? Sikhle, are you speaking in code here? Truck attacks, 5 arrests in connection with the torchings of trucks. Thank God there have been some arrests because for a good solid week and a half, SAPS, the South African Police Services, seemed quite hapless on this image, even as social media was bringing evidence upon evidence upon evidence onto our screens. What am I referring to here, of course? Not Cadbury. Let me come back. There we go. No, man. 5 people, of course, have been arrested and 1 is being questioned in connection to the torching of trucks across South Africa. That's 20 trucks around South Africa in the provinces of KwaZulu, Natal, Mpumalanga that have been torched. Drivers across the country are living in fear, not knowing whether they may be the next victim. Begitele, of course, there, as you see in this image. I'm not going to play this. I have no interest in listening to this asshat. Probably as he loves the media attention, taking all the credit for these 5 arrests. But again, the industry itself, if you speak to industry insiders, basically indicating this has been an issue long in the making. There's a confluence of issues here, and law enforcement, if you listen to what they're saying at least, has actually been relatively useless. It's been these flash in the pan moments now that have prompted some form of action from Ubhekicele. And Ian, you know I was going to begin with you. You've been on this man's case rightly from day one. A failure of crime intelligence, Ian.
Shut up!
There is no crime intelligence, Sikhle. So you know, it's yeah. I must be honest. I don't think anything's going to happen with those 5 arrests. The chances of them being successfully convicted is virtually 0. It'll be pretty much impossible to have someone just testify as an expert from the South African police side to get things done. There's a massive issue with cops not being able to testify in court properly anymore. There's a massive shortage of cops. And I'm not saying this to badmouth the police. They just don't have the resources and the training they often need. And the good ones that are still out there, of which there are many, are completely overworked. So they're in a very, very difficult spot. In terms of Cele showboating, it goes to show how little they think of the lives of innocent South Africans. With the blue light issue, he was silent. In fact, he sent, or his spokesperson sent a very, very sarcastic message to the media and said, send my regards to my critiques. And that was kind of his approach to the media. So I don't think anything will happen to them. This is a massive organized crime issue. It needs a far deeper investigation. They took it easy for a while now. I think it's just going to flame up again. And it's the same with the extortion of the transport industry between the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape with taxis and buses. There's no difference in this. We haven't seen any form of conviction. When Fikile Mbalula was the Minister of Transport, he literally had a court order against him saying that he needs to do something, and he still didn't. And it just continues unabated.
Just as I unmute myself, and I'm going to stick with you for a second, Ian, you rightly point out the fact that it's not our first rodeo as South Africans, where these police will come out and say, oh, you know what, we've activated a 72-hour plan. That's the news buzz lingo now, when they need to appear like busy. We've activated a 72-hour plan. There'll be arrests very soon, but very little in the way of follow-up around prosecution also. Firstly, before prosecution, quality evidence gathering, quality crime intelligence, the putting together of solid dockets that a prosecutor can then actually take into court and secure a conviction around. It's not just the tracking. This is the part I wanted you to speak to. The construction sector has the same problem, where there are actual mafias developing in this country now. People who recognize the vacuum that the South African police have left of law enforcement, or the lack thereof, and are now forming their own cartels. Much like the Mexicans have drug cartels there, we have cartels here who control sectors of the economy, construction, tracking in this case. I can go down the line. Transport, when it comes to the taxi cartel in this country, SAPS, nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, no, you spot on. It comes back to look, obviously we can speak about economic issues, we can speak about socioeconomic challenges, social issues, etc., etc. So just purely from a policing and a Department of Justice point of view, I recently read a report from the Institute for Security Studies that showed that only 14.5% of murders are actually solved. So that means that almost 80% of murders go unsolved in South Africa. So I literally had a discussion with a cop in KZN the other day, and he joked, it's a good cop. He said to me, Ian, look, if you want to commit the perfect murder, do it in KZN or in the Eastern Cape. You're pretty much guaranteed to get away with it. You know, and it is that common. We've got cases, Sichle. I was in court last week in Strand, in Cape Town. And it's a young lady, the victim. Her name was Nadia Lot. She was killed by her boyfriend. He put on her favorite song for her. When she got into the car, leaned forward, slit her throat. And the horrific thing about this is that he was out on bail for a previous attempted murder case. Sipokazi Boy in Paul, exactly the same. The guy was out on bail for a previous case regarding an assault on her. He beat her into hospital, still got bail, and then he killed her. So they mustn't come with this crap that they've made 5 arrests. 5 arrests mean nothing. With these types of people that do this to an economy, you don't only arrest them, you fight fire with fire. If you should be kicking down doors, you should be doing larger operations. And if it means you take down an entire trucking body, then that is what you do. Why aren't they using bodies like National Intervention Unit or Special Task Force, etc.? And I don't want to hear that they're doing it confidentially or, that it's a secret operation. That's crap. An example needs to be made of these guys. It's the only language that they understand. But you see, the thing is, they are in cahoots with many of these senior politicians. And that's what it comes down to. Every single bit of organized crime in South Africa, I guarantee you, can be linked to senior state officials, even junior ones, but the bigger names. Eskom, perfect example.
Even as you're saying this, Marius, I must throw it to you because you're the author of the IRR's document that looks at the issue of policing and the failure there is in South Africa. It's an all too common story, Marius, and I always say people vote with their feet. And if you look at the data, it's absolutely crystal clear around South Africans losing faith in SAPS, choosing instead to pull out money from their own pockets in order to pay private security to play that role at most basic level of visible policing. I always say private security is more visible in your neighborhood than actual SAPS itself. I can go one step further. We're seeing the development of I don't know what to call it. I don't have the lingo, but like specialized services, even from private security, investigations, for example, VIP guarding, you can name it. They're beginning to have specialized units in private security. It speaks to that lack of accountability and lack of faith, if you will, lack of accountability from SAPS, lack of faith of the public in SAPS.
Yeah, I think that's it. As you say, the Institute of Racial Relations releases its Broken Blue Line report. I think we've done 3 or 4 so far, and we're busy with another one at the moment, and just looks at criminality within the South African Police Service. And it's quite frightening how many police are involved in crimes, from fairly petty things, to arresting somebody and stealing their wallet, to, full of murder and rape and so on. So it's pretty terrifying. And as you say, we've seen the number of security people using private security, it's really skyrocketed. But as we know, not everybody can afford private security. And as is always the case in South Africa, it's poorer people, especially poorer Black South Africans, who really suffer from the collapse of the state and so on. People who've got on decent incomes, they can pay for private security, they can pay for security around their homes and so on. And not everybody can do that, unfortunately. So, but people are definitely losing faith in the police, even apart from the issue of more people using private security. There's been a couple of surveys done asking people their trust in various types of institutions, and trust in the police. These are from different surveys. So this Afrobarometer did one, the HSRC did one, also asking people what they think about the police. And you can just see how trust in the police is collapsing. Also, another thing that you can look at is how many people, the proportion of people that report crimes to the police. Most people only report crimes to police if it's something really serious, like a murder or something, or if you need a police number for your insurance and so on. And the proportion of people reporting crimes to the police is also on the decline, which just simply shows you people that they just know it's actually just going to be a waste of time. You're going to go to the cops, you're going to stand there for an hour or two, or maybe even longer, to give your statements, and nothing's going to happen. It's a waste of time unless you really have to go, as I say, for insurance purposes, or if it's something incredibly serious, like I say, like a murder or something like that. So, but the collapse in the police service is just, it's linked to what's happening in South Africa. We've seen the collapse in governance in South Africa. And I think the collapse in what's happening with the SAPS and how it runs things is just symptomatic of this. And yeah, and you can also just see from things like the murder rates, where a murder rate was actually on the decline up until about 2010. And then from 2010, it's skyrocketed, and the number of people getting killed in South Africa, some of the guys on the panel will be able to correct me, I think, but I think we are possibly now the second most murderous society on earth, if you go by per capita murders, I think. But somewhere around there, we're definitely in the top 10. And I think we might be second, but you guys will be able to correct me.
Tim, let me quickly come to you, because again, this is what I like about this panel. There are people in this panel who are very, very, very strong on the data around this, but not only the data, physically get involved in the fight against crime. I can speak from experience in this. Tim, we've had this conversation. We really have a situation in this country where, again, I really hate, sound like I'm beating a dead horse here. And I want to quickly just add a caveat, just in agreement with Ian. Of course, there are brilliant police officers, absolutely brilliant chaps who wake up day in, day out, don that blue uniform.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt that it's not a horse, it's a donkey. It's a donkey.
It is a mule, a terrible mule. But I want to make this point. Because I think it's important, so that people understand who Vigilante, the likes of Vigilante, are failing. It's not just South Africans. It's also the people, ironically, who he is the political leader or the political head of the organization. Guys who wake up, wear that blue uniform, put on those bulletproof vests, put on a service pistol, and walk into the darkest of spaces in order to keep us safe as we're sleeping soundly. Well, it's questionable as whether it's sound sleep, but nonetheless, those guys who actually say, look, I'm willing to give up my life for South African communities. It's that chap who's also failed, in addition to the South African citizen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I've spent a considerable amount of time with those specific kinds of police officers, and they do it because they want their community safe. But at the end of the day, SAPS has an unofficial motto, and probably also agree. If you want to solve crime, you have a meeting. And the elites at the top of SAPS, all they ever seem to do is have meetings, and then they go, "Oh, I know, we'll have a 72-hour blitz," and then they do what they're doing now in Johannesburg, where the minister walks around with bolt cutters, cutting open private businesses, opening their doors and barging in like he owns the damn place. It's just window dressing. They make it look like we're doing something and do nothing at all. And at the end of the day, I mean, I'm a firm advocate for people to now start arming themselves. You can pick up a revolver at a gun dealer for $500, a snub nose 357 Magnum, $500. Yeah, it's secondhand, but at the end of the day, you've got 6 rounds that are going to at least save your life when you need it. Because we cannot rely on SAPS, and even if they are, because here in Cape Town, we know when the good teams are on and when the good teams are off. On certain nights, we know who the guys that are working, when we can actually get stuff done. And some nights they aren't that way. And also, by the way, at 6 p.m. when shift change happens in the SAPs, don't even think about reporting a crime. It's not even going to help you if you phone in and say, listen, someone's breaking up my house, because it's shift change and that's what you'll get told. So yeah, I don't know. It's baffling me, and unfortunately, these guys that are doing the hard work, like for example with the truck stories, that's gotten so bad because our crime intelligence capability has gone to shit. It's terrible. Crime intelligence is just non-existent in this country, and I've had the privilege of working with two fairly competent, one very competent and one fairly competent police portfolio chair. And both of them have mentioned to me at times that they've seen it, that the crime intelligence budgets of each individual police station is not being used. So each police station has money that they can use to pay informants and pay for operations where they can use a trap. It's called a trap operation, where they use a trap to bust a drug dealer or bust a whatever, where they pay these guys for doing it. And they don't do it. So where's that money going to?
You know, that's the crux of it. Thanda, I'm going to come to you, Colonel. I'm going to give you last word on this one. And then I think we're going to open it up for discussion. I want us to actually chew on this one for a moment. Thanda, this is where the likes of him and really the political elites lose focus insofar as why their portfolios are very important. I mean, as a libertarian, a classical liberal, I argue the state shouldn't have pretty much any responsibility because it's pretty terrible at anything it does. But the few areas where the state should have some say and some responsibility is in law enforcement and, of course, the administration of justice to protect life, liberty, and property rights of citizens. Here is a trucking sector, Thanda, and you'll notice they were attacking that very important corridor between the interior of the country, the N3 that links it to the ports, the massive port of Durban. So these guys, these truck burners, these arsonists or attackers, whatever you want to call them, they're not stupid, bruv. These are clearly there's some form of organized nature here, and they're attacking the economy of the country. And they know they won't be caught.
Yeah, I think for me, Ian really summed this conversation up. When big things like this happen, we talk about crime intelligence and we talk about how they're incompetent or they can't do the job. I sometimes wonder whether our institutions are as incompetent as they seem to be, or whether they just deliberately don't want to do the job. Because as we said, we know that with the trucks themselves, I mean, let's kind of move back with this trucking stuff and take it back to Eskom. We know that at some point, our railway system was collapsed so that everything had to move with trucks, okay? Then at that point, we were already asking ourselves what's corruption is going on then. We know that there's a lot of politicians involved there. There was issues around diesel. The diesel also had to be moved with trucks and stuff like that. So everything was involved with that. Now, all of a sudden, we've got a situation where we've got a corridor and trucks are being burned. So there's something going on there as well. And do we really think that these trucks, which we know belong to politicians one way or another, would just be getting burned if the politicians don't know what's going on there? I mean, I believe that they've got the information. They probably knew that this was happening. It's either an internal fight, with amongst these politicians for certain type of power, or they are trying to introduce, there's going to be some new tender that has to go out to try and solve this problem that they've created. So, for me, it all follows along. When you talk about trucking, it always all follows along maybe a plan. I can almost call it a plan of trying to collapse the country and hold everybody to ransom, and extract as much money as they can from law-abiding South Africans. So, so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't believe that it's a case of, it's collapsed. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to do their jobs. As you guys say, there's a lot of people who do know how to do their jobs, but they simply can't. They're not supposed to do it. because this is how things are supposed to happen.
Again, Chris, Utanda summarizes it exactly the way I always think about it. A deliberate attempt to hamstring the one area of the state which should have teeth and should bite hard. That is law enforcement and the administration of justice. A toxic nexus here of politicians who purposefully and deliberately undermine the state in this regard. And of course, a criminal elite who partner with these politicians in order to fleece the state and fleece society. It's almost terrorism for financial gain.
Well, there's definitely an element of domestic terrorism taking place here, certainly these truck attacks. But I like that you keep having me go after Thanda because I get to keep quoting him. He's got some good stuff here, so it's kind of handy. But look, this isn't rocket science. As Thanda alluded to, this suits the needs of certain elites who are invested in the trucking industry and so on. And it really, there's a reason why this happens. But what we got going on here as far as, let me break this into two pieces before I wrap up. I'll do the truck thing and then specifically about crime in South Africa. Look, this is the truck incident, simply a case of the usual suspects with Bekele, so to speak. Kaiser Sose and the usual lot have been rounded up. So this isn't rocket science. As an intelligence analyst, I can tell you my first questions when these attacks occurred, where were the attacks? Well, Van Riemen's Pass. Why did they occur there? When did they occur? What time of day? Is there a pattern here? And what, if anything, is in common? Are there commonalities between, is it the same trucking companies? Now we've discovered that they pulled trucks over and those who were South African citizens were allowed to flee or allowed to continue on, and the foreigners. So we found out pretty quickly that it was foreign truck drivers being targeted. This is not rocket science. And the other question, is this another version of the taxi wars? Is that what's happening here? It looks like that's what it is. That was my first supposition without any ground intelligence that came to that conclusion. Doesn't mean I'm right. But here's the real problem, switching to crime in South Africa. There is no deterrence whatsoever to committing crimes in South Africa. People commit crimes with impunity with no fear of retribution or any consequences. Who murdered Edward Neumeister at his lockdown closed restaurant in Balgowan back in June of 2020? We don't know. He was stabbed over 90 times with a panga and butchered. And we don't know who killed him. Who murdered Brendan Horner on the 1st of October in 2020? We don't know. Look, it's not just a case of the SAPs at fault. The criminal justice system is the problem here. Very few arrests, even fewer prosecutions, virtually no convictions. And even then, when folks get convicted, they get released back into the public. These people have murdered and raped and looted. But as far as SAPs, they're just not up to the task. Instead of converting the old South African police force, who did a good job protecting the minority population and oppressing the majority, to a community policing model, South Africans have gotten the likes of Jackie Salibe and Bekele. The backlog of DNA, forensics, it's pathetic. Experienced investigators missing, unserviceable vehicles, corrupt and incompetent officers. It goes on and on. Look, the N3 attacks are detrimental not just to South Africa, but across the region. And I said this in July 2021 when the ANC's insurrection was unfolding. Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, all are harmed by the interruption of goods and services moving between Durban and the interior. Now, finally, in those other countries, folks are looking at Walfish Bay and Maputo with trucking routes to just abandon South Africa altogether. And that's not going to help anybody. Yep. So rather than improve security, the African National Congress has weakened public safety for nearly 3 decades. Political leadership of SAPs, underfunding of prisons and the Department of Justice, criminals leading the police, the disbandment of the Commando Reserve System's 178 regiments on the fraudulent claim that they were a racist organization. The 4 newest regiments in the commando system were all Zulu based. Every single member was Zulu, all black South Africans in those 4 regiments, and which was the only a source of employment for many of those reservists, disbanded because the ANC saw them as a threat because they're not very bright. Look, it's not rocket science. There are people that don't want the system improved, and that's why it doesn't improve. It's not hard to fix, but it takes political will, and that is lacking in South Africa.
Again, fellas, I'm going to open this up so anybody can chime in whenever they want on this particular topic. But I want to throw this little idea grenade in the middle here and see what you guys think. There is an incentive by some people to literally undermine the most effective crime intelligence investigative units for 2 reasons. And I want to play devil's advocate. I want to be a politician and almost try and argue this from their perspective. So Bekele might say to you, oh no, this is the legacy of apartheid. We have policing that wasn't geared towards the majority. It was weak in its structures. In fact, like Chris said, but he was perverting it. The police were actually seen as an instrument of suppressing society, not catching criminals. Also, the second argument they might make, I'm struggling with this one because really, how does one reason like a politician? But okay, fine. Let me throw the second one out. Also, we can't really do much about crime because really the economy is not in the hands of Black people, and because it's not in the hands of Black people, those Black people are at the lower rungs of society, more likely to be criminals. And what do you expect me to do as a Black politician? I can only do so much. That's why the much that I do is to make sure that my budget for my safety, namely VIP protection, is the most in SAPS. The rest of you bitches, tough shit. As I said, anybody can jump in.
Well, I'll jump in first real quick here. First off, let me tell you, poverty in America is not poverty in Bangladesh. It's not poverty in Burkina Faso. It's not poverty in KZN. But I grew up in poverty, also had other circumstances. We had no money. I lived off of public assistance, that sort of thing, had no electricity, fetched water from a cistern to shower and wash dishes, and that sort of thing. That was my life. Now, don't cry for me, Argentina. I'm not complaining. I actually built a lot of character. What I am saying is this. I know a lot of poor people, and I know a lot of poor people in Africa. Poor people don't steal. Desperate, starving people steal, but poor people don't steal. Criminals steal. People with poor moral upbringing, poor people with no morality, they steal from other people. They rape. People who are poor don't gang rape young girls and then bludgeon them to death. That isn't a consequence of poverty. That's total horse shit. And Bekachile, if he would make that argument, is a moron. But there's a certain segment of society, Black, white, and brown, that will believe that garbage. White liberals and a bunch of other people. People commit crimes because there's no deterrent to doing it, and they can get away with it, and they have poor morals. Whether your morals are good because of religion or they're good because of some other reason, because you have parents that raised you, you weren't raised by wolves. Heck, I think wolves would raise some of these folks better. The bottom line is that this is a nonsense argument. Poverty does not drive crime. That's crap. If poverty drove crime, every country in the world would be up in flames. 4 billion people live in abject poverty around this planet, and they're not burning down everything around them. That's just nonsense, and I'm sick of hearing it. It gives no agency, particularly to Black South Africans, because the assumption is that all Black South Africans are poor, and they have no ability to make judgments. And that is insulting, racist, and bigoted, and I hate it. And that's how I feel about it. Sile.
Well, you're also seeing it in things like in how the police are handling criminals. It's gotten so bad that they don't believe the consequences of a criminal being arrested that they've arrested are going to see justice. I've been on patrols. I've been out in areas where pretty savage beatings have been handed out. I was on patrol one night in Stellenbosch, and there was an external unit that was brought into Stellenbosch where a young guy had stabbed a fellow club goer. And we were involved in arresting the guy, cuffed him, and I took him to this unit who was going to take him to be protest. And I was told to stand outside the vehicle. And while this guy was in the back, look, he stabbed the guy and the guy died. And we had just heard that the guy died. And I saw this guy, I'm not going to say what unit it is, but I saw this one guy from the unit inside the SUV hold onto the panic handles on the inside of it, lift himself up physically and plant 2 boots forcefully into the guy's face. And he repeatedly did it until the guy blacked out. You see this a lot with the SAPs that are meting out their own justice. I've been tempted to do it myself because it's a guy that I arrested last week for whatever, and he's back out on the street doing the same thing. He's just broken into the same house, or he's just smacked his wife around, that sort of stuff. I've never done it because it's obviously criminal and I don't want to be liable for that sort of thing. But SAPs are getting cut for. But the thing that concerns me the most, that even if criminals are scared of being caught by some police officers, like some of them will say, please don't call Captain so-and-so. Please don't tell warrant officer so-and-so. Because they're shit scared. They still go and do that same thing over and over again. There's no going to jail isn't a punishment, and if going to jail is not a punishment and not getting a savage beating by a police officer until you're like unconscious and bloody, then what are we going to do? What do we do as people in this country? And then we start seeing things like what happened in places like Kailicha or Nyanga. A guy gets caught he's suspected to have raped someone. And what happens to him? He gets beaten to death, stoned to death, and burnt on the side of the road. Something needs to change on all aspects of it.
Also, another problem is you mentioned something like in Khayelitsha getting a suspected rapist. But you also hear stories a suspected cell phone thief gets beaten up by the community. And it doesn't matter what you've been alleged to have done. You have to, you can't condone vigilantism like this. But this happens when the police start falling apart, when obviously these communities don't believe that the police are going to do anything. And these people are frustrated. Obviously, I mean, there's no way you can't condone any kind of vigilantism, even no matter what the person's been obviously accused of. But this is what happens when proper policing falls apart, and people are going to take these things into their own hands. And I'm sure, for somebody where cell phone's been stolen, for a lot of people, say in Khayelitsha and whatever, a lot of people, a cell phone it's probably very expensive for them. It's probably 3 months' salary maybe to get hold of a phone, and it's probably then your only way of being able to get work and all that kind of thing, and access to possible potential employers. So I think there's a lot of frustration, and as I said, just it shows again how people are losing faith and trust in the police, and it's it's quite worrying.
Well, this vigilante stuff really becomes a serious problem, Chile. I mean, I saw it in Liberia. Sadly, there's nothing I can do about it. I watched 2 people beaten to death from my apartment building next to the embassy. They were accused of being rapists, and neither one was a rapist. They were beaten to death with cinder blocks by hundreds of people. No one could get through the crowd to try to save them. I was sitting in the Ministry of Defense one day talking to the minister, and we heard a big commotion out behind us. We looked like, what's that? We saw some guy jetting through the bushes, behind the buildings in central Monrovia, and a crowd of probably about 150 people chasing the guy, and he was running for his life. He was fortunate that the Nigerian security guards who protect the Nigerian general at the ministry responded, and they're fitter than the civilians. They ran and they captured it and took him away. I don't know if he was guilty or not, but the point is that meting out justice is not acceptable. We see this all the time, the horrific things that happen, and oftentimes the innocent. And even if they aren't innocent, they're guilty. Everyone should be arrested, charged, and prosecuted. That's how it works. You cannot have vigilante justice. This is not the Wild West, a reference from the United States. You can't have that. You just can't have that. And when people don't trust the police, that's exactly what they do. And it's not just in townships. It'll happen in suburban areas too. When the chaos comes, when the electricity is gone, the grid collapses and ran water breaks down completely instead of just for maintenance, then people start meting out justice on the streets of Hatfield and places like that too.
And again, Thanda, I'll let you come in. I just want to quickly say something. This thing, it's not new, Thanda. Whenever we see a breakdown on trust and a relationship, the breakdown in the relationship, between a community and SAPS, community members will always take initiative, good or bad, but mostly for the bad. Insofar as one of the comments I put on screen, it's kangaroo courts, where effectively you as the person accused of something, there's nothing you can say, there's nothing you can do to prove, quote unquote, your innocence. This is an angry mob, justifiably angry, by the way, and they're like, you know what, would rather make an example of you.
It reminds me of Judge Dredd. He was the what is he? He was the jury and the executioner as well. So you've been judged, and unfortunately, it's like that. I was in Uganda for some time. They, a police station. I don't know what they use the police station for, what the police are for, but the community never waits for the police and never takes anybody to the police. They deal with it, immediately. But again, for me, we look at this, we look at SAPS, and we can talk about what needs to improve. And obviously, there's a lot of things that need to improve in the SAPS itself. But again, I always try to go back and see how these things, it's just, even if you could fix the SAPS, I don't think you could fix what is going on. Why is Joburg, Alexandria, why are people on top of each other in Alexandria? Why are people on top of each other in Deep Sloot? Why are people on top of each other in Khayelitsha and everywhere? That is an environment that is going to breed criminality, all kinds of social dysfunction that's going to exist there. Human beings are not supposed to live on top of each other like rats. That's just the fact of the matter. What has happened over the last 30 years is that rural towns, there are many towns in South Africa, many of them in rural areas, they've been collapsed. Nobody sees a future there. So everybody runs to the city. The cities, there's no ways they're going to be able to cope with the amount of influx, the rate of that influx, and be able to cope to build the housing or whatever that's needed so that everything is structured, the way it should be. I went to Deep Street the other day and I noticed that I can't see a single house there. Like, that's just a house, that this is someone's house, he lives there. Everything has been built up. It's double stories that have obviously never been approved by any city. It's just little units that have been expanded. It's just a mess, There's no single house that I can see that this is actually just a proper house that was built by the government or this person years ago, 10 years ago. And in that kind of dysfunction, I don't think there's any amount of policing that's going to get South Africa right. And so that's why I say that these politicians, since they've come into power, they have been systematically, steadily collapsing the country, not because necessarily they're thinking about collapsing it, but because all they're worried about is stealing. And therefore, they've allowed things to collapse wherever they collapse. Eventually, everybody goes into the big cities, and eventually the big cities can't cope. And eventually they begin to collapse. And as Chris said, eventually there's going to be a collapse in these big cities as well that have been kind of trying to keep things going, the metros, and then what will be left of South Africa.
I want to say something here.
Sorry.
Just Chris in a moment, sorry. And I'll let you chime in a moment. There's a very important distinction Uthanda's making here, and it rides off of what Chris was saying. The crime isn't happening because someone is poor or is living in poverty. No. The crime is happening primarily because of a failure of the state, primarily. Let me be precise. Whenever you have a situation where people move into an area illegally, invade a piece of land, a informal settlement mushrooms there, the people who live there aren't inherently because they're poor criminals. Instead, it's because law enforcement can't enter into that area that you'll likely have criminals who harbor themselves there and comfortably make that place home. We have a section in my home township of Umlazi where it recently made the news where 8 people were just murdered on a single evening there. And the reason they were murdered, or the murders, were so easy to happen, is because SAPS physically cannot enter into that area. You cannot have visible policing if the police themselves cannot actually enter into an area. So again, it's the failure of the state. Whenever you look at the crime issue, always ask yourself the question, how easy or difficult is it made to police that particular portion of society? Not because they're poor, and not because they inherently are criminals because they're poor, but rather, do they have access to law enforcement like those of us who are more privileged? And that's why you're seeing, unfortunately, for the good and the bad, the development of the alternative forms of justice, because the state itself is simply not reaching these areas. Chris?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, I think I'm going to have to invite Thanda onto my K-Nako segment because he's got some good arguments here that I keep quoting. But listen, the problem is so multifaceted. And unfortunately, instead of getting things right and fixing policing and fixing education and fixing things like that in 1994, the ANC has not gotten it right. We have a global trend that's not changing, and it's picking up pace, and that's the rapid urbanization of the planet. Mega cities, 20, 30, 40 million people going to be in them like Tokyo, and it's happening especially in Africa. So whether there was a good economic system in place and poverty was much lower in South Africa or not, there would be this move into the cities. The difference would be that the cities would be able to absorb it at a reasonable pace and spread out services. As Thanda was saying a moment ago, in Deep Sloot, that's a perfect example of it. These people go out there, some shady people sold them plots of land. You see some rather nice houses people build out there, but no ordinance, no zoning structure, no commonality, and you get all kinds of problems. Instead of that thing being authorized and done to standard and spec and the city able to absorb it, add it to the water delivery, water disposal, electric grid, they aren't able to. And then people grow angry with the government. In that case, that's not the government's at fault, but all of this ties together. The rapid urbanization is a serious problem that the world must deal with. Even here in the United States, we're dealing with people flooding out of the rural areas into the urban areas. But at least here we have better capacity to absorb it. And again, I want to reiterate, I think all of us have kind of said this now, my poor people aren't thieves. They aren't the ones who commit the crimes. I mean, yes, that doesn't mean there aren't no poor people. There are some poor people that commit crimes, but the point is that poverty doesn't lead you to crime. Starvation and desperation, different story. If you're starving, you might steal some food. I get that. You might break into a house. But most of these people that are looting trucks that get break down on the side of the road in KZN are mostly people that could spend a little time with Jenny Craig. They're not exactly people that are hungry. So again, my point, poor people aren't thieves. It's only the desperate and the criminals.
We saw a trend start happening during lockdown in South Africa, and I picked it up particularly in Cape Town and the southern suburbs. And what happened was, in areas like Bishop Lavis and your traditional sort of gang areas, we had your 28's gang members that weren't comfortable staying at home alone or staying with their families indoors because they were becoming targets of other gangsters. So what they did was they packed up their shit and then they buggered off, and they were like, dis lekker in die suid. We're going to go to the southern suburbs, boys. And they went to Mowbray and they went to Main Road and all these places, and they set up shop. And the people that were homeless, that were trying to survive, were kicked out of their tents, kicked out of the places that they were living in, where they weren't really a problem. And then we saw an influx of gangsters living in the southern suburbs. And then what happened was people picked up on this trend. They started seeing 28 being tattooed or being tagged all over the walls. People were getting mugged. People were getting robbed. Their houses were being broken into. 35 cars a night were being broken into in the street. And then you had people like me who got who with a bunch of mates got tired of this. And we were like, well, we're going to start patrolling. We're going to start dealing with these guys. And then this is where some of the problem comes in too. So we've got a government that is failing in its constitutional mandate. But then we've also got a populace who are encouraging of this kind of thing. And you'll know the type, shame, man. You know what, guys? It's not nice. Tim, I saw you pepper spray that guy the other night, and you can't tell the poor colored man he's starving, and I saw you pepper spraying him, and I was reported to the South African Human Rights Commission for that one. Meanwhile, the guy had a British flag tattooed on his forehead. His name was British. He was part of the Hard Livings gang members at one point, and British was out of action because a fellow gang member had shot him in the back and he walked a little funny. But when I stopped him trying to break into a house, he pulled a knife on me, and instead of shooting him, I pepper sprayed him on courtesy because I didn't want to have to deal with the police. I could have shot him and gotten off because it was self-defense. But this middle class, upper class, and I'm going to say it. People are going to be cross with me. It's white people. It's the shame, man. And don't worry. Come back to me next week. I've got 500 Rand for you and some food. And every week, every single household or second household will give poor British $500, a 5 kg pup that he sells for drugs anyway. And then. And these guys, one woman we had found out, she had been in prison multiple times and she was out for murder. She was making between 5,000 and 6,000 Rand a month because of the shames. But yeah, that's it's the citizens are as complicit in not doing anything than the politicians in some instances.
You know, even as you say this, because I'm going to have to wrap up this segment, we must move on. There's the issue of Malema and really animal cruelty that we saw this particular week. It even had traditionalists with raised eyebrows as to what was happening at the EFF. But before we get into that, I think that last point Tim makes is critically important. There are some people who are very sheltered, who don't actually realize how bad things are and how life is, perhaps, for a broader segment of South Africa who bear the direct brunt, that is, who pay the direct cost, if you will, who can't outsource the bad effects of the failure of the state on the issue of crime, and who then think a realistic mindset, a defensive mindset that most South Africans have to protect life, liberty, and property is somehow anti-poor, or, you know, it's Chris actually said it earlier on. It's almost a a soft bigotry of low expectations. This idea that you can't hold a black individual or a colored individual or an Indian individual, sorry, I'm trying to run the gauntlet of our race classifications in this country, to a higher standard insofar as their own moral behavior on issues of you shouldn't be doing crime. And by the way, I'm not saying white people don't do crime. I'm just making the point.
Don't forget us pink
It's an
folks.
inability.
Don't forget the pink ones.
Oh, there you go. It's an inability to actually say no. Crime, period, is unacceptable. We as South Africans should have a common message around this and defeat it. Guys, last round of comments on this before we move on.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's an interesting thing. I don't know. I think I want to encourage the viewers. Start a neighborhood watch in your area. Get a firearm. Carry pepper spray with you. And if you see a crime and it's go and do a short Google search on what a Schedule 1 crime is in South Africa. If you know a lawyer, chat to them about a Schedule 1 crime. If you see someone committing a crime, make sure it gets stopped. We saw a guy trying to steal the bike off the back of a car the other day. It's a Schedule 1 crime. You're allowed to use minimum force to stop that guy. And if he pulls a knife, you've got a firearm and you put a bullet in him. And it's time that people need to stop apologizing for saying that. If someone wants to kill you, you put them down before it's too late, and the world's going to be a better place for it.
Well, being prepared is probably the best thing. You've got to expect the worst. A few years ago when I started my broadcasting, because people know I had a background in intelligence and security, which is a little bit different than security services like G4S and such. But nonetheless, I have experience in that because it was part of my portfolio. People asking for advice all the time. And I said, there's very simple things you can do. When you drive into your leafy neighborhood, if you live in a leafy neighborhood, you're fortunate enough to do that. Don't just open your gate up and stop in front of your gate and open it. You got to drive past, look around, make sure anything's not unusual, out of the unusual or out of the norm. And then when you come back, have that thing timed, know how long it takes so that it opens as you drive in, so you're not stuck there and becoming a victim. And if you have space, turn that thing around, combat park it so you can drive right out and run over anybody who assaults you. But simple stuff like that. But the bottom line with all this stuff is that you've got to protect yourself. I think one of the best videos I ever saw coming out of South Africa, these things put on Twitter and TikTok all the time, was in Pretoria a couple of years ago. This woman walked up to her house and there's no gate, cars parked there, and these clowns pulled up in a Mercedes outside. 4 of them rushed out and pointed guns at her. She turned around and she whipped out a firearm and she started capping them. And she was ready. She didn't panic, and she actually took a proper stance to shoot at them. So it wasn't just wildly. But I mean, that's the bottom line. I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with firearms, and I appreciate that. And I'm trying to tell you should get firearms. There's other ways to defend yourself. Look, I've got a torch that'll take somebody out. That thing is pretty heavy. I mean, and when I use that torch, if I walk outside at night, I've got that thing positioned so I can use this as a weapon. You got to learn how to protect yourself. Self-defense courses and firearms, whatever it takes, you got to protect yourself, because the bottom line is this. By the time police respond, whether it's in Harrisburg or it's in Harris Smith in South Africa, you're dead or raped or kidnapped. So you can't blame the police for not being there. So you've got to take some steps to help protect yourself. And that's where we got to go from here.
Absolutely. Marius, I'm gonna bother you because I want a bit of a take from you around reforming SAPS, because that part of the conversation is also, pardon me, quite important. But just to write off Tim and Chris, and I'll come to you, Thanda, in a moment too. I also am a big advocate of, guys, get armed. Do the paperwork, get that test done. I know it's difficult for some of us, especially with learning difficulties. I've been sitting with these combination manual booklets for a while because I'm very, very dyslexic. But even if it takes you a whole year to read, study, and then submit your blah, 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 do it, guys. Do it. Because not all of us can outsource the violence that we need to protect ourselves. I'm lucky in that sense that at least when I'm in KZN on the farm, I've got guys who I've hired who are very, very competent with firearms and who protect the farm and my property. But when I'm here in Joburg or if I'm in Cape Town, I don't have that luxury. Guys, get armed. I want to come to you, Thanda, before I go to Marius, because Marius, I want him to cap it off insofar as how we reform our points. And no pressure, Thanda, if you don't have anything to say necessarily. But I want to throw an anecdote. My girlfriend recently, we had this chat last week, in fact, and we got in touch with Gideon Nube, of Piratas, because she was saying, Big Daddy, you're right. I think it's time I consider gun ownership. I don't necessarily have to buy the gun, but just getting competent, getting licensed, maybe step one, because she had that experience of a breakdown in Cape Town in the evening on that death gauntlet that is the N2, and that changed her perspective completely.
Look, I actually believe that the duty to arm, it's actually a duty. I think it's a duty for every law-abiding citizen to be armed. And you know what, I always consider a lot of situations in my head, and you know the situation that Chris, the incidents that Chris was referring to, I remember it well, in which you was able to protect yourself. But in many cases, actually, when you have a gun, you often aren't able to protect yourself with a gun, because if somebody's already pointing at you with a gun, you know, unless you are really good at quickly drawing it, it's unlikely you're going to be able to protect yourself. So actually what I believe is that it's a duty for that every law-abiding citizen has to their fellow law-abiding citizen to be armed, because in many cases in South Africa, crimes are committed and the other people who are around are just watching. Literally crimes, hijackings, killings. AKA was, you know, a famous artist was killed in broad daylight. And you know, in South Africa, exactly all they do is they pull out their cameras. They're killed in broad daylight, or they're killed in front of people. We've seen videos in Hillbrow where people get mugged and people are just watching. Everybody's just helpless, and it's, for me, it's actually an indictment, especially on us as the men. I'm kind of a guy who believes that as men we need to take that our responsibility to protect very seriously. But on everybody in society, we should all be armed so that we can protect each other from the criminals. We are 100 to 1 in terms of the law-abiding citizens to the criminals. There's no ways that we should be getting overpowered by them. But it's because we have this false belief that police are our bodyguards. They should be out there protecting us. The police is not your personal bodyguard. They're there to serve the state. They're not there to serve you specifically. We've got to protect ourselves, and it's a duty that we have to be, you know, sufficiently armed.
If I can jump in there quickly, just on the last one before we move on.
Go ahead, guys.
Look, people think a cop carries a gun to protect you. No, honey, that cop is carrying that gun to protect himself. Mm-hmm. So that's why you need to get one to protect yourself too.
Marius? Again,
so
there's a part of the conversation around, sorry, Marius, I was just saying, there's a part of the conversation that's needed though, around, you know, what do we do to reform law enforcement? Can SAPs even be salvaged? Should we even bother with that? And if it can, what needs to happen to see some form of reform that protects citizens' life, liberty, and property?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's clear that the SAPS needs to be reformed. And I think that's actually an important point. Maybe SAPS is actually beyond reform now. It's, you know, kind of similar to ESCOM, where the only real solution, I think, will be to break the thing up and start from scratch. So I think we had a couple of proposals with the broken blue line before. They were, you know, reinstilling respect for the chain of command, creating a university-educated officer corps, better equip IPID, decentralized decision-making in station leadership, and depoliticized the appointment process. And I think decentralization is actually a very important way of reforming the police. I think what's been happening in the Western Cape, where they're effectively starting a provincial police force or police service, I think is a very good idea. And that's definitely something we need to look at. I think letting each province have its own police service or police force, I think would be, you know, pretty good idea. The kind of policing that you need in place like Kuruman is very different from the kind of policing you need in Alex and Joburg. So we can't really have this one size fits all kind of thing. And I think that's one thing we really need to start looking at is the devolution of policing, and not just the Western Cape, to each of the 9 provinces. And I think that's where we can start. But I think, yeah, I don't know if the SAPS is actually reformable still. I mean, you know, Tim and Chris and Thando, you guys might have some ideas around reforming it as well. But yeah, there's, I think for me, right, the most important thing now is to look at devolving police powers to the provinces. And I think what the Western Cape is doing is very important, and I think could be a model for the other 8 provinces too.
You know, it's we have in the States, we have a very comprehensive policing system with county, township. I have township police here. We have state police. We have the FBI, which I like to call affectionately the Federal Bureau of Incompetence for their actions of late. But no, we have military police. We have park police. We have Capitol Police. We have over 750,000 law enforcement officials in this country, and we have crime. But the thing is that devolving it does make a difference. But one thing that's important is has to be a commonality of standards. And I don't think that Marius is trying to get away from that. But for instance, one of the things that I actually enjoy the most about TikTok, that cancerous social platform that I'm on, TikTok, one of the things I really enjoy about it is there's these guys in the States do what we call First Amendment audits. They'll go to a public piece of property and they'll like show up, and then they'll be harassed by the sheriff or the security or the police at that area telling them they can't be there. It's illegal. They actually arrest some of these people only to find out they violated the Constitution. So for instance, like they'll go to the city hall. You can't film here, or the licensing bureau, and the guy's filming. He's just, you can't film here. That's what our policy says. Yeah, but that violates the Constitution. It's illegal. And then they arrest the guy. It's shocking how many law enforcement officials in this country are wholly ignorant of the most basic document we have, the U.S. Constitution. We have 10 amendments which guarantee freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and that's one of them. And they're like, this is private property. I'm like, dude, it's owned by the city, which means it's public property. Anyway, but the point is that if our officials are that ignorant of law, and we have rigorous training and refreshment at all levels of law enforcement, I can only imagine how ignorant of the law many law enforcement officials are in South Africa. I know in many countries in Africa, they have no idea. Some of them are just thugs in uniform. Look, I'm not trying to diminish. I support law enforcement, but those who know what they're doing, not those who are thugs in uniform.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm sort of leaning towards tapering off this conversation. We've got to move on. Again, it's something which will always be a hot topic. And I saw a little comment here, which is a little snide, or I want to just quickly touch on, from some guy named Gert. Only the colonel's been to war here. Bro, do you know where you live? We're South Africans. Most of us literally wake up every day and experience some form of mini war. 84 people killed in this country daily. Worse than some war zones. Please, don't come talk here on my comment section. Yes, I
want to jump in and add that I've probably been shot at more than Algerki has himself. At 3 o'clock in the morning while he's in his bed sleeping, I've had bullets from AKs come flying my way. So don't talk about who's not been in combat. I've been in the SNDF myself as well.
Literally. I mean, in my case, numerous gun battles in this country, one of whom I must give credit and I must thank South African Police Service for saving our lives. It even made the papers in this country where armed robbers tried to rob me with an MEC, believe it or not. Anyway, let me leave that there. Never dismiss the fact that South Africans live in a war zone. And this is why we're saying South Africans have to have a defensive mindset and get armed. That's the whole point of why we're making that particular call. But anyway, let me move on, fellas, to something which I think really, it was appalling. It was disgusting for me as someone who's very traditional, very proud Zulu, someone who's myself, I've done this on numerous occasions at family events. And that's the slaughter, of course, of an animal for the food purposes of a traditional party. Now, I want to quickly preface this. If you're from PETA or any other animal rights group, you're not going to like this conversation. Because we're not coming at this from saying we disrespect animals, but actually the opposite. Anybody who's what's the word? A meat eater, if I can call it that. Sorry, I'm thinking of this sentence because I'm, and I just want trying to quickly translate. Those of us who are in Nguni or Bantu tribal groupings, I'm a Zulu in particular, a very proud Zulu of the Ngobese clan, actually have a massive reverence, a massive respect for cattle and animals in particular, animal husbandry in particular. That extends all the way to the point of having to kill an animal in order to feed your family or whatever the case may be. It has to be quick. It has to be as painless as possible to the animal. And of course, it has to respect the fact that this animal, you've raised it, of course, for this particular purpose. It is for that reason that the images we saw of one Julius Malema fumbling his way in slaughtering an animal for their 10th anniversary bash that happened today, if I'm not mistaken, was sickening. And indeed, in the comments under that particular tweet they put out, and I'm not going to share it. I'm sorry, I don't want people seeing what we saw. It took 2 minutes for him to kill an animal using inappropriate knives, inappropriate tools, and no one said anything around him. And for me, this sounds like I'm making a big issue out of something small, but really it isn't. Because it was even Black South Africans who took exception to what they saw by Malema there, and of course his justification of it, to say, oh no, this is African practice. No, Baba, it's not. Thanda, and I have to come to you, because you're also a fellow Zulu on this, and I know you're quite a traditionalist, like I am. The images we saw there, completely unacceptable.
Yeah, I think it's we were talking about policing, and one of the first things we talked about was Begitsele and him liking to come into the scene and want to be seen by people, talk a big game, and then he disappears and the crime never gets solved. It's the nature of politicians. It's that ribbon cutting. It's ribbon cutting. That's essentially what it was. Where a politician comes, all the work has been done, and comes to cut a ribbon and take credit. And so it's something that everybody knows. When we have a function in Zulu traditional culture, we know who the people are who know how to do this. They've seen it, they've done it, they are well, and this person comes, he knows the tools that he needs, he comes with his tools and he does the job. That's what normally happens. But of course, this was being filmed, and there was a politician there, and the politician just had to be front and center in something that he has no idea what to do. And unfortunately, an animal had to suffer for that ribbon cut. What the politician essentially saw as a ribbon cutting ceremony, instead of what it was, a proper slaughter that needs to be done of an animal, which my grandfather did. I saw him do it, and he did it very painlessly, to the animal. And somebody shared a video where somebody did it like it disabled the animal within like 2 seconds or something. They did it very quickly. There are professionals who know how to do it, but this was a ribbon cutting ceremony for another politician who wants to be in the limelight.
And as I'm saying this, I've just put on screen, as I said, I'm not going to play the video, people. It bothered me. It really bothered me. But I just wanted to share this quick piece from the South African that wrote on this, again, expressing how even his own supporters were like, no, dude, this is off base completely. The National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty of Animals implored to take action against Julius Malema. Painful cow slaughter video. There's just a still of that. And just look at how prima donna he is. How he's holding that knife. It just reeks of incompetence. And what really pissed me off was, and this is so un-African in nature, all the men standing around him said nothing as they watched this man fumble his way through this. There is an actual, and let me be specific, there's a Zulu saying that if the animal suffers, the nature of the meat is tainted even for the ancestors who you then present it to, arguably. That's for certain cultural things, and I'm not saying I dabble in that necessarily, but I'm just making the point. It's why, for example, as Thanda was making the point earlier on, there are certain designated uncles or elders who will literally stand right next to you, especially if you are a novice at this, to show you how it's done properly. And if you don't do it properly, quickly take over, because the suffering of the animal itself is seen as massively taboo. I had an uncle who would literally beat me on the head if I messed this process up. God rest his soul. Guys, I want to come to you here. And really, let me begin with Tim, and then I'll go to Chris and then Marius. I know it might be difficult for you guys from a cultural perspective, but it doesn't need culture to justify or really to see that this was animal cruelty.
Look, I've hunted and I've slaughtered animals myself. I had sheep, I had cows, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I put .22 round between just above its eyes at a specific angle and dropped it on the spot. But I had guys on the farms in the areas around where I hunted and where I worked, where they could do it with one blow with a knife and that cow dropped immediately without any pain. Julius talks about cutting the throat of whiteness, but you can't even slit a cow's throat. So let's not beat around the bush here. That animal suffered. When I saw it, I was physically affected by it. And I've seen some pretty horrific things myself. I can't believe that Julius, who's got all the money and who seemingly would have slaughtered cows in his time as a politician, couldn't even do that. And there was a guy in the video who seemed to be some kind of an abattoir worker or something like that, who worked in the area too, and no one did anything. I can tell you right now, and the EFF can come after me, it's fine. I reported it to the SPCA. I phoned the NSPCA's number, and I was handed from one incompetent person to another incompetent person and got the whole, it's not my job. They took my name, they took my phone number, we'll get back to you, and that was it. I gave them the plot number, everything, and we're not going to hear from the NSPCA.
Again, there's perhaps a problem here. It's that impunity that Malema has seemingly just enjoyed, where maybe even people are feeling a sense of why even bother reporting it, because this guy seemingly does something on camera, breaks the law, and it goes nowhere. Or if the court cases are there, they just drag on and on and on. Marius is a good example of him shooting that firearm in a crowded EFF rally, and that court case has been postponed and postponed and postponed. So I can understand people saying, why even report this incident, even though we saw that animal literally suffer for the PR purposes of an EFF?
Yeah, it's quite tricky. I mean, probably you're right. Nothing will happen to Julius Malema, but I think it's still important to go to the authorities about these kinds of things. And I'd say I'm actually quite surprised this happened with the EFF, because generally their marketing and so on is actually pretty good and pretty slick. I'm obviously not a EFF supporter at all, but the colors that they do, the photos, the publicity photos of Malema, publicity videos and so on, normally they're really good actually, and they got high production values. But this, it was really, as you say, there were a lot of people, a lot of them who seemed to be EFF supporters, who were criticizing Malema and what happened to this poor animal and so on. So I think this was a real misstep by them. And Malema is also, he's trying to, put the EFF as the kind of custodian of traditional African values in South Africa and so on. And if you can't even slaughter a cow properly, it says a lot about the person. I'm unlike Tim. I don't think I could kill an animal, but I like to eat meat. So I definitely can't criticize people who do kill animals. But I think it's very important for it to be done as humanely as possible. And we saw this wasn't. And this poor creature, you could see it was suffering. And I'm actually just getting goosebumps thinking about this poor cow. The poor thing. Humans, we need to eat meat, but we need to make sure that when we do kill animals, it's done as humanely as possible, and this was not an example of it. And I think it really, I would love to see some polling around this and see what people think about Julius Malema and his attempt at trying to kill this poor cow.
Chris?
Well, first off, for Marius, I can explain why the marketing wasn't done so well this time. It seems that the EFF's retainer to Bell Pottinger had expired. They didn't have any money in the bank to pay for, so that's why they failed on this one. Epic failure there. Listen, the crimes of Julius Malema are legion, and they must be reported. They must be covered. They must be charges brought. And it doesn't matter whether he never goes to prison for his domestic terrorism or for his racist rants or all the other things. You must document it. Otherwise, the history will be falsely reported in the future. Just in the recent past, we've got not only did he fire a rifle into a crowd, but then they changed the receiver to deceive the police. That's another crime in and of itself, covering it up. Beyond that, his domestic terrorism, exhorting his followers to attack a black majority-owned business called Clicks in the aftermath of a stupid ad placed by a black manager at Clicks from a European ad in France. And domestic terrorism, they petrol bombed one location. They attacked 43 Clicks locations. Then his domestic terrorist actions at Senegal on the second Senegal event, when in English they switched from languages from Bantu languages to Nguni languages to English to make sure that we all understood clearly when they said burn the Boer out, burn them down. Within 96 hours, 72,000 hectares of prime farmland in the Free State and the Northern Cape were torched, and one person was horribly burnt. Thousands of homes were destroyed. Tens of thousands of livestock and wild animals were killed as a consequence of this. And what did the ANC say? Well, it was a service delivery protest. Yes, because people show up at 4 o'clock in the morning during lockdown on a remote rural road and light tires because they know that's where the press is going to show up. Give me a break. The list goes on and on of his crimes. It's unbelievable. And you know what? The latest, we've got a judgment now that sorts things out. Nothing will happen to him, but we don't call for the slaughter of white people. Not yet, anyway. Apparently, he can't call for the slaughter of cattle yet because he's a moron. The bottom line with this is it's just sickening. It's absolutely sickening. Look, I mean, and as far as cultural things, Chile, look, I mean, I spent half my life in Africa. I mean, I lived all over the continent. So I am of Africa in many ways. And this is part of my culture as well when it comes to the as you say, ritual slaughtering of livestock. But also I was a farmer in the States with pigs, chickens, goats, turkeys, dairy cows. And so you don't do that. I mean, why would you harm something? Animals can feel pain. You know, that's just sick. And the reason that Joyce Malema does it is twofold. The idiot thinks that it will appeal to traditional people and get him votes. Obviously, that's not going to be the case here. And number two, he's just an arrogant asshat, as you like to use. That's my phrase, asshat as well. He gets away with it impunity, and he has never really paid any consequences for his crimes. I mean, how does this guy who's never held a job ride around with Breitling watches on that cost $30,000 and ride around in all these expensive vehicles? Maybe we should talk to, I don't know, he likes to talk about the Oppenheimers so much. Maybe that's where he gets his money from, the Oppenheimers.
I want to quickly say something here, because I can see there's some people who maybe don't understand where we're coming from this. And we'll wrap up after this because we must move on to our final topic and wrap up the show. And I'm forgetting my point. Oh dear, am I getting this wrong?
Slaughter livestock.
Let me take a step back. Let me quickly deal with this comment here. Andrew, I do invite my detractors. I do invite the likes of the EFF, leftists generally, onto other platforms. They never come on. I think there's a good reason for that, because we will literally take them apart here. I'll actually slaughter them efficiently. Verbally before YouTube strikes this channel down. But let me quickly say this. It was interesting for me to see. Oh yes, that's where I was going. There's two things I think they're trying to do here, Marius, just to your point around, I don't understand why they would put this on there. I think they were trying to get a rise out of what they stereotypically associate as white people who are anti-animal cruelty. I think they were trying to get that whole dichotomy of, oh, there go the white people again, saying we shouldn't slaughter our animals as Africans. But it really backfired. It really backfired, because it was actually, and it was mostly Zulu voices I noticed, and maybe I was part of leading the charge on that, who are saying this is completely, it's off base. It's completely off base. It paints a terrible picture of our customs as Africans around the ritual slaughter, or just the slaughter for food of animals. And really, if anything, us as Bantus and Ngunis in particular, the reverence we have for our cattle, that was a complete disgrace that we saw that. I mean, we have cattle who are literally named after our identity as Nguni cattle. And to watch him do that was completely off base. Guys, last comments from everybody before I move us on, if there are any comments.
Wholly unnecessary. Oh, sorry, Tim. Wholly unnecessary. I agree with you, Chile. It's race hustling. That was part of why they did it too. I didn't bring that up. That's definitely part of it, because they foolishly think that, you know, that white folks are against it, but they seem to forget the people that they're most terrified of. The Boers are farmers, and they slaughter livestock every day. So kind of backfired. Race hustling is never a good idea.
Yeah, someone needs to buy Julius a sharp knife and teach him how to use it. Because you've got religious sects or religious communities in South Africa, Jews and Muslims, who use a knife to slaughter their animals, and you watch a rabbi slaughter a cow and that animal doesn't suffer.
Absolutely. It's a Jewish process called shrita, which is very, very serious rules around that too. And animal suffering is, avoiding it, is the whole point here. Guys, final comments?
Just from my side, I think it's important, again, we remember this is a politician who's doing this. Everything is part of, their plan. They don't care. It didn't matter to him, it doesn't matter to them that something went wrong and animals suffered. Julius Malema is on a long road towards what he thinks will be a powerful position in the country. I think they believe that the ANC will go below 50% next year, and that he will eventually be in a position of power. We know that there are people within the ruling party that are already working, with the EFF. We've seen people like what is that man, Jimmy Manyi, Zwadene Manyi, who's moved from the ANC to an external party, and he's moved now to the EFF as well. So there's a bridge there that's being built. So he's just, he's trying to, obviously this was a little bit of a bad PR thing, but why these things happen and why they're careless about it is that all it is just putting themselves out in the limelight, and eventually he's going to get into that powerful position in the country, and he already is in a powerful position in the country. We know there's been VBS, which Daily Maverick put out a lot of, very solid proof about what happened there. There's been no prosecution of any EFF, politician in there. So they already are in bed with some of the factions and people in power within the ruling party. So that's why it's that consistent thing. Going back to our first topic about what was his name? What was that guy's name we spoke about first? I forget now, but the one with the bodyguard and stuff. Mashatile. It's people who know that there's not going to be any consequences for what they do, because they are the elites of the country. They are our rulers. The ANC talks about how they rule in the country. So they are our rulers, and what are we going to do about it?
Okay, guys, I must move us on. We're set to wrap up at 10. That's a hard cap for us. So let me get the final topic out, please. I think it's the penultimate or final topic. Marius, you wanted to chew on this one in particular. And I think it has implications generally for politics globally. The Dutch. You'll know, of course, there have been a lot of ructions in that part of the world. Let me just put this headline on. And as I'm doing this, a firm reminder, every time I take a moment to put an article up, use that moment to hit the like button, please. You're watching Liberty and Friends in conversation with Tim Flack of Guns Unscented. Make sure you find them. Did I say unscented? Made your gun sound like herbal candles here, Tim. It's Guns Uncensored on YouTube. Please find him. Marius Roodt, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations and the Daily Friend. That's dailyfriend.co.za. Mondays to Thursday at 1:30 p.m. Colonel Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa Show, and of course, Mabaso, analyst out in Pretoria. This is Liberty and Friends. We're in the last 20 minutes of the show. Guys, here's the article here that I just pulled up. Farewell, Mark Rutte, the thuggish, excuse me, as a Freudian slip on my part, the tigerish Dutch Prime Minister. Now, this is an article, of course, speaking about the changes, the rapid changes that happened in the Netherlands in that part of the world, which has effectively seen its prime minister, Mark Rutte, being ousted, a populist party rising to the fore. This is the Farmers and Citizens Party. Marius, I'm going to come to you. This issue, of course, stemming from that massive battle between the state of Netherlands and, of course, the farming community primarily, which, again, I'm going to paraphrase it poorly here, but I'll let you do the talking. The state was trying to shut down farmers for climate change reasons. The farmers literally revolted in that part of the world, which led to the popular ascendancy of this political party. And here we are now talking about it having pipped the political leads, seeing political change there. Do you want to speak to this, Marius, before I throw it up?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. This farmer citizens movement, as you rightly say, it's emerged out of these the farmer protests in 2019 or 2018. I forget the exact year. So it was first on a kind of a farmers' interests platform, but there were provincial elections recently in the Netherlands, and this party actually came first. It only got about 20% of the vote, but it was the single biggest party, and that's apparently because a lot of people in the Netherlands saw this party as protecting traditional Dutch values, and they decided to go for it. So at the moment, it's only got one seat in the Netherlands, in the Dutch Parliament, but it's currently polling. It's first in polling, just ahead of Mark Rutte's party, which is the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, I think its name is. So I think it's it's going to get, it's probably going to be the single biggest party of the next Dutch election, which they're holding a snap election now because Mark Rutte resigned. I think the election is due in October or November. So I think it's just, but it's definitely, it's something that we've been seeing around the world, especially in Europe, with the rise of populist parties, whether if they're more on the left or more on the right, but we've been seeing it across across Europe. We've seen it in France, we've seen it in Finland, we've seen it in Greece. We've seen it even in Ireland now, Spain as well. So people are definitely moving away from the kind of old centre-right and centre-left parties that used to dominate politics. I think in France, in the last presidential election, the old traditional centre-right and old traditional centre-left party, between the two of them, their candidates only got about 20%, or not even, I think maybe 15% in the first round of the French presidential election. So, and even in Germany, where the old centre-left party, the Social Democrats, and the centre-right party, the Christian Democrats, used to be between them get 80-90% of the votes, and now they're getting between them 35-40% of the votes, 50%. So things are definitely changing there. And I think it's also something we in South Africa can actually also look at. South Africans are still stuck in, we can't imagine things outside of the ANC universe. People, when we talk about, people are starting to now talk about a post-ANC South Africa, but then you still get people who talk about the ANC is still going to be an important player in South African politics, which is probably true. The ANC is probably still going to be around for a while. But it's not far off when the ANC is going to be an opposition party, and they're not going to be the ones who are running the country and making policy and so on. So people, I think there's a lot of recency bias with people. They think that things as they are today are how they're going to be for the next 10, 20, 30 years. But as you're seeing in Europe, politics is changing very quickly, and it's very hard to predict. And I think South Africa could learn a bit from there.
Absolutely. And I want to throw it to Chris. Because I think what I found interesting here, and I'll mention the elephants in the room. A lot of these European leaders are often seen as stooges of global organizations, whether it's the World Economic Forum, et cetera, others going to much more deeper conspiratorial talk around these issues. But there is something to be said around leaders of nation states coalescing around this notion of building the global state, the super states, if you will, being now pushed back by citizens in their own countries to say, no, we're Dutch, damn it, we're French, damn it, we are English, damn it, we'd rather build the nation state, or rather a national identity, as opposed to ceding all of this to, I'll use the word, a globalist agenda.
Well, part of the problem here is, as Marius kind of touched on here, is that the old model of the center-right, center-left is dead. It's broken. It's because they're sclerotic. They're just suffering from sclerosis. They've accomplished nothing except destroying. I mean, just one issue here. Germany's cost of electricity is astronomically high. People pay 5-6 times more for electricity in Germany because of political decisions, not because of the actual capital market. And it just goes across the sector when it comes to social, it comes to immigration, it comes to economic development, it comes to ownership. It's everything. Mark Rutte is from a center-right party, a so-called populist party, but that's nonsense. The second largest agricultural exporting nation in the world is not Russia, it's not Ukraine, it's the Netherlands. They have the second largest amount of farm exports after the United States on the entire planet. Have any of you been to the Netherlands? I've been there. I can pee from one side of the country to the other. I mean, come on, man. You just, whip it out. You can piss all the way across the Z. It gets one side. It's tiny. And there's a reason they're incredibly efficient and productive. And they have turned to achieve their cult of climate, their cult. They want to change things to benefit that without stressing the trade-offs. It's simply get rid of stuff. It's like EVs. We all got to have EVs. Never buy the mountains and destroy to get a few kilos of metal to make batteries, or the yards and yards of thousands of electric vehicles dumped in China just to say that we produce 2 million electric vehicles and they just rot there. It's ridiculous. This is a cult, and they're trying to undermine the farmers. And this is a revolt. And this is a clear signal for people. Look, in Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, they're painted as right-wing Nazis, which is not true. There may be some, right-wing supporter Nazis in that party, but they simply look so far right because everyone else is so far left, including the Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Socialist Union. The Tories are not Tories. They're worse than the Liberal Party in the UK. Yeah. The Republicans are no different than the Demon Rats. They're all the Uniparty. These people have, by and large, failed the people of the planet, the voters. And people, what's that television, that movie? I've had enough. Damn it, I've had enough, and I'm not taking any more. He screams at News Radio, whatever it was, that show back in the day. People have had enough of it. And listen, in 1848, they took to the streets and burned things and nearly overturned the empires in Europe in 1848. We are reaching a stage here. Australians are hot full of being locked up in concentration camps because of the decision of unknowing politicians who know nothing about the viral spread of, and I won't go any further, I won't get your channel in trouble, but you get my point here. Locking people in concentration camps, violating their basic law. The Canadians locking truckers up, destroying, freezing their financing, using anti-terrorism laws when all they did was follow the laws of the Republic. It embarrassed the government. This is a warning shot. This government will collapse and there'll be a new government. But that doesn't mean it's going to improve things because this Farmers Party is too small to get the support it needs. There's got to be trade-offs. And the same thing in South Africa in 2024. The ANC is going to get 42% at best. They'll probably get 38% of the vote. They're not going to be the majority. The EFF won't have enough to merge with them to lead. So there's going to be a grand coalition possibly, and there'll be trade-offs, and it'll be a fractious government. South Africa in 2024 will look like Italy from 1945 to 2000. That's what's coming. There you go, folks.
And again, I just want to come back to this point because slippery pickle. I'm pickle Rick in the comments there. Making a point which I want to quickly just touch on. You know, there's of course the conspiratorial stuff out there, but as history has recently shown us, especially since 2020, a conspiracy theory sometimes it's only a matter of months before the element of truth in it is more clear. And I want to quickly say something here, and I'll throw it to Utanda and Utim in a moment. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that there are global interests. There are individuals who sit in these superstructures, whether it's the World Economic Forum or whatever the case may be, who push an agenda that simply is not beneficial to, again, the idea of protecting the individual and protecting the individual's life, liberty, and property rights. That's where I come. That's the angle which I come where I support some of these quote-unquote conspiracy theories. Let me be precise and specific. The courting by the WEF of Chinese-style citizen control measures, the what's this expression? The social what am I looking for? Social credit score type stuff is exactly the risk I'm against when I'm against these global and really globalist entities. It is an affront, it is an attack on individual rights, something Africans, by the way, do not need, given our history of the lack of respect for individual rights on this continent. People who really shouldn't have any control on any nation state, where it should be the people of the country, Tanda, who determine where the direction of a country goes, not these global or globalists, as that expression is often used.
We've got an American here, so I like to talk about the Cold War. You know, there was a Cold War that happened some years ago, and apparently there was the good guys, and then there was the axis of evil, and the democracy and versus autocracy or something like that. And you know, as I've thought about things over the years, I've begun to realize that it's all nonsense. You know. All these large super states in which we live, in which there are millions of people. In America, there's 350 million people. South Africa, there's 60 million people. Nigeria, there's 200 million people. There's no ways that you matter as an individual amongst a group of millions of people. You never will. Whether they rule you directly, autocratically, or whether they give a semblance of a democracy. I mean, the way Chris spoke, he sees the fact that the Republicans and Democrats, it's just a show to pretend that there's a choice, but there is no choice actually. So the type of countries in which we live are not built around being of benefits to people. The borders we have, how things are configured, have always been for the benefit of the few. I mean, Africa is a great example because some people sat and decided what borders must be in Africa. You know, you had the Zulus here, and even amongst the Zulus, there was different kind of nations, within them, the Xhosas, the Abatembu, and different nations between them. People had grouped themselves according to their common interests and common histories and goals and whatever. That's how a nation is supposed to be. But some people then went and just drew a random border and said, listen, you're one country. And from there, it's about how efficiently can they get resources and they can do whatever. So that was colonialism back then. But what's happening today, it's the same thing that's happening. Now it's kind of being experienced, not just in Africa, it's being experienced everywhere. So in the US, they allow the borders to be porous so that you can have, low-wage South American people who can come into the US so that they can take the jobs that maybe the Americans might be, they might ask for more rights or whatever the case may be before they get jobs. We have the same situation in South Africa. Our borders are also porous. I spoke earlier about the collapsing of many places in South Africa, the many small towns in South Africa, and everybody flooding into one area, and then eventually one person dying is not a big thing. In a small town, if one person dies, it's a huge thing because probably everybody knows the person, or at least knows someone who knows the person. If somebody dies in Johannesburg, a city of 5 million people, it's like, oh, okay, another person. We just now count numbers. We say 84 people died. We don't even name them because we don't care who they are. So it's these unnatural human structures that we live in, which are the countries that we live in today, of millions of people who don't know each other. This multicultural nonsense where everybody must going to be cultural, we're going to come together. You guys don't know each other, you don't understand each other. You end up not caring about each other. Then nobody cares if somebody is killed. If a crime is happening to somebody in front of them, nobody's going to try and stop the crime because who is this guy? I don't know him. I don't want to put myself in harm's way for a person that I don't know. So it's just a perversion of human relations. That's actually what's happening. And it's been happening for a long time. That's why I went back to colonialism to show you. It's been happening for a long time, and it's just now culminating into they've got now the technology, you're talking about the social credit score system. They're starting to have now the technology where they can really start showing us that they actually don't care about human beings, and that's the scary thing. So it's something that's been happening for a long time. And I don't know, I'm happy for these pockets of resistance in South Africa. The pockets of resistance, we've spoken about this before, Sihle, is the Put South Africa First movement, where people are saying, no, we don't accept this. Everybody can just come here. This is we want to be our own country. We want our borders secured, and we want to be able to live in a certain way. So you're happy for those pockets, but you just also realize that you're just kind of fixing the symptoms of the bigger problem being you've got a structure that doesn't work.
Okay, just very briefly, guys, let's be mindful of time. We literally only have 2 minutes left, and maybe I've left this a bit too late because we're also discussing multiple things here at once. So let me repatriate us to just a core topic around this issue. I'll unpack this in a later episode. Obviously, all of this plays itself out ultimately in the national politics versus the international global politics that we're seeing and trends internationally. Are we seeing, and this is a final question, and I'll throw it to everybody and then I'll wrap up. Are we then seeing, perhaps, as Thanda touched on, a rise on local-based politics where political parties take on a single issue, perhaps, and become a block for that issue, which will then maybe form coalitions that are more nationalist orientated versus what we've seen before, the traditional liberal / conservative dichotomy that has ceded a lot of its national control, if you will, to global agendas, if I can put it that way. What are we seeing happening here? I think there's a politics playing out. What are we seeing happen? Tim, and then Marius, and then Chris and Thanda. Tim?
Well, I mean, certainly if you look at the Dutch situation and what's happening in the Netherlands, the Rural Populist Party emerged because of the issues surrounding farmers. And that was something of national importance to everyone in the country. They realized that their farmers were very important. And that set them in place. And what old Rutte has done is that he's resigned, saying and blaming it more on politics revolving around his coalition to issues of immigration and illegal immigrants coming to the Netherlands. So he's blamed it on that and trying to shift the blame off of that and trying to push the idea that no, it was the coalition government that this is why I resigned and this is the issue. When in actual fact, the big issue around the whole country was that the Rural Populist Party hit the nail on the head, and individual issues and local politics are actually working. South Africa, on the other hand, I'm not so sure we South Africa, I see South Africa as being very, very unique. We're not America, we're not the US, we're not Europe, we're not New Zealand. We've got a very unique way of doing things here. So I think South Africa fits into a different discussion on this one as well. But certainly internationally, I think individual issues, Ukraine, farming, global energy crisis, and carbon emissions and that sort of stuff are coming into play in areas like that.
Just when it comes to South Africa, I think local issues are definitely becoming more important. If we look at the last local government election, sort of local based parties did very well in those elections, and a lot of municipalities, they're kind of the kingmakers, and they're often getting quite important posts, the mayoral post or the speaker post and so on. So I think in general, people are looking to politicians or leaders who are a bit closer to them in terms of communities and stuff. I think that's kind of a microcosm of what's happening around the world, happening in municipalities around South Africa. And I think that's something that's going to carry on happening. Our politics is going to continue to fracture. Like Chris said earlier, South Africa is going to, our parliament's going to look what, like Italy did after 1945, or it's going to look what the Joburg municipality looks like now, where the ANC is the biggest party with only about 33% of the vote. And there's nearly 20 parties on the Joburg City Council. So Parliament's going to look like that pretty soon. And the ANC might still be the biggest party, but they're only going to have about 30% of the vote. So, yeah, as the Chinese curse goes, may you live in interesting times. And I think it doesn't matter what country you live on Earth, live in on Earth. I think we're all in for some interesting times coming up over the next decade or so.
Well, I think that it's not really an issue-based rise. I think Tim said he mentioned a couple of issues there. The issue of immigration and farming came into play. It's a conflux, or what's where I'm looking from. It's a convergence of these different ideas, but rather it's a rejection of elites all over the world. And it's in no small measure a rejection of elites. Now, whether this will succeed when the sitting parties, the corporate elites, and the rich and powerful are there in position with all the levers of power, if they'll allow it to happen, or will they do what they've done in the past? They'll simply co-opt these movements and make them part of what's going on. I can look no further than the Green Party of Germany, whose sole issue was denuclearization of nuclear weapons when we put the Pershing IIs in Germany. Well, here they are 40 years later, and now they're running around doing all sorts of things not simply related to energy, and they're part of a ruling coalition, and they have been co-opted. Now, I'm not a fan of the Greens. My point is that that's where they're kind of at. So, but in South Africa's context, and for good or bad, right or wrong, identity remains a huge factor in South African politics. People will vote for Freedom Front Plus because they speak Afrikaans and they think that that party represents them. People vote for the ANC because they are Xhosa and they assume that that party speaks for them, or because they identify with white, black, or brown. People vote for the Cape Colored Congress will get votes from colored folks just because they're colored, not necessarily for the policies. Not everybody votes that way, but a sufficient number of South African voters and voters around the world, same thing, Democrat, Republican, they vote based on identity, and you will not change a percentage of the voting population. In America, 1/3 of America is Democrat, 1/3 is Republican, and 40% is independent. And that's probably the slice you're looking for. And in South Africa, if you're the DA, the Freedom Front Plus, the IFP, you want to dig at that percentage and maybe get a few from those who are hard to recruit. But identity, unfortunately, that's why Malema was pandering by sticking a butter knife into a cow's head, because he was pandering for what he thought he could get. Yep.
I'll just end off by just responding to Rob here, who says we need to just accept, these countries and the way things are and how the borders are built, and just accept the fate. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't see a situation in South Africa where South Africans are ever going to really be able to agree on something. The reason why the ANC has managed to get 60, almost 70% was at least Black people were able to agree that apartheid was bad. And therefore they were able to all come together and vote for a party in large majority. But as apartheid becomes a matter of the distant past, as Chris is saying, our identities are starting to come to the fore. We've spoken before about a rise in Zulu people saying we would like to have an independent, Zulu nation. And we know Cape independence, and we know all sorts of things going on. As I say, these superstructures that try to force some sort of weird multicultural, everybody living together things, they don't work. They eventually, nobody knows what's going on, and eventually you find yourself, you're being controlled by people that you don't know. There's no way, and that's exactly what happens. I don't know Ramaphosa. I don't know him. I've never met him. I never grew up with him. I know nothing about him. So I have no idea who pays him in the background. I have no idea who controls him. You understand? So, but I'm forced to pick between him and Steenhuisen. I also don't know Steenhuisen, never met him either. But I must vote for one of them. Who are these guys? That's the question that actually needs to come to the fore at some point. We can't accept these superstructures called countries because they don't make sense. You end up voting for things you don't understand, and eventually, and we don't really have any control over our countries. Democracy, we have as little control calling ourselves a democracy as China, that we laugh at them, we say, no, they're an autocracy or whatever they are. We still don't have any control because we don't know the people that we choose.
As I said, there's lots to this conversation, and there's lots of moving parts to it. And again, you're hearing it from Abo Thanda here, that there's a confluence, is the word Chris was looking for, of issues coming together here that speak to what happens at the most local level. Who controls the media environment and community and surroundings that you have? Who controls what happens at a regional level? Who controls what happens at a national level? And of course, are we seeing the seeding of those levels to a globalist agenda, which I think there is a conversation around that. And you're seeing perhaps a pushback, as Chris also rightly said, against those elites who are pushing that globalist agenda, because those elites, in my view, this is my 2 cents, those elites look to something like China and look to a authoritarian social credit score system like that, and they smile. They say things like, yeah, this is what we need for the West. This is what we need for America. This is what we need for Africa. The seeding of individual and community and really family rights. I talk a lot about the individual as a classical liberal, but really we're a family society. And insofar as families are held intact, there is a globalist agenda to break those and see that sort of power that happens at the family level at a much higher nefarious level. Guys, we have to wrap it up. With that being said, thank you to the panel that we have on here. I know there's going to be some load shedding threats here, so let me begin with Tim. Tim, final word from you. How do the folks get in touch with you? And what's coming up on your show in the coming weeks?
Well, they can take a look at my website, flackpartners.co.za. That's my PR firm. And they can head over to my YouTube channel, Guns Uncensored. And what they can look forward to is we're currently dissecting a battle in Bakhmut. Some trench warfare, looking at some World War I techniques that should be being deployed in trench warfare, but we're not seeing, and how useless the Russians are at using artillery, because they don't seem to know what a barrage is. They send like a single round every once in a while over, and it doesn't really do anything. But that goes back to institutional memory of a military organization, and both sides don't have any institutional memory. So check out my channel, and we'll chat soon.
Absolutely. That is Tim Flack from Flack Partners PR. Make sure you find them, as the information is on the screen there. And of course, his channel. Actually, there's this channel there. Guns at Guns South Africa, or really Guns Uncensored if you search for it in the search bar. Marius, Daily Friend, what can we expect? How do the folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if people want to go to the Daily Friend, it's dailyfriend.co.za. If you want to follow it on Facebook or Twitter, just put in Daily Friend and you'll find it there. If people want to follow me, they can follow me at Marius Roodt. I think we'll just be doing with our usual stuff of trying to oppose bad policy and so on in South Africa. And that's, it's one of those things, fast of freedom is eternal vigilance. And you just saw the South African Communist Party start talking about things like prescribed assets again, which was something that we thought we'd managed to bat back. So, and we also have the expropriation bill coming up in Parliament again soon as well. So there's lots of stuff to there's a lot of fighting on a lot of fronts, I think, still coming up in South Africa before the election next year.
Absolutely. That is, of course, Marius Roodt from the Daily Friend. Find them, please, at dailyfriend.co.za. The Colonel. Chris, how do the folks get in touch with you?
Well, a couple things. First, final word, folks, the Westphalian system of states is not going away. It's under assault from social media, from globalization, but it's not going away. There's no alternative in the near term. And so we have to learn to live within that system. Tomorrow on my program, Valen Cosini Labisa, the president of the IFP, will be on. We'll be talking about IFP coalitions and governments in KZN, municipalities, as well as the Moonshot Pact, Dr. Peter Groenewald's endorsement of him to lead the Moonshot Pact. And also we'll be talking about the 2024 elections. So that should be exciting tomorrow. Special broadcast time, 2 p.m. South Africa, 8 a.m. East Coast here. Also, I'm coming back to South Africa. I'll be in another brick in the wall, the BRICS tour, the 28th July to the 25th of August. I'll start out in the Western Cape, then fly over to Gaborone, Port Elizabeth. I'll spend a few days there, then off to KZN, and I'll be in Amanzimtoti and Howick, as well as Durban. And then with any luck, I'll be meeting Mangosuthu Buthelezi, but that's not locked down yet. So we'll see how that goes. And then up to Gauteng, where I'll cover the National Convention of the opposition parties and then the BRICS Summit and do a few other things. Anyway, but folks can find me at Real Chris Wyatt. That's my old channel. It used to be censored. It got restored after 23 months. And my regular channel for the daily news, Chris Wyatt Reports, at Colonel Chris Wyatt on YouTube. You can find me on all the social media at WMW Chris. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Chris, you had people wondering where you were going there for a moment.
With what?
It made it sound like you're going to the Copacabana.
No, I'm busy doing the electric slide with the electric slide minister, you know. It's electric.
Chris, of course, was talking about Beja, or as I still call it, Port Elizabeth. Nonetheless, that is Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. Thanda, how do the folks get in touch with you? What's your socials?
Yeah, I'm just active on Twitter at ThandaM2. I'm just a social commentator, so I just say my stuff there, and that's where you guys can find me.
Excellento. That is, of course, Thanda Mabaso. And again, I must say thank you to every single one of my guests as I get them off the screen. And thank you, dear South African, for watching tonight's show. Yes, the long haul. 2 hours and 10 minutes. Wow, that's a long one. That's the longest episode we've had. Remember, guys, as I say goodbye to you, a small reminder, there's going to be a lot of changes on this channel. A lot of you always say, oh, but CK, Big Daddy, what are you doing outside of this channel? We're launching something, guys. I keep saying this. We're working on it. It's nearly there. With that being said, a reminder to you, please hit that like button on your way out, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter. If it is on YouTube, smash that subscribe button. Help me reach my goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And of course, we have a website. Find us, please, at BigDaddyLiberty.com. There, of course, you can also find out how you can support the channel with a monthly contribution. Guys, thank you so much for watching this evening's broadcast. I'll see you Wednesday for the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Very interesting topic and interesting guest, and that I won't even spoil that particular surprise. With that being said, as I like to say at the end of every broadcast, never trust a commie or a globalist. Same thing. Good night.